Thanks, Charles. So you know the deal. There is no dessert until I'm done. So listen up. Before I start, let me say a couple quick things. Let me just first thank B4E for putting this event together. You know it is part of a series that have been held in Mexico, Jakarta, London, just to name the last year and a half or so. And I just want to recognize Tony and Charles and the rest of the B4E team for all the work they do to bring us together and what have proven to be very substantive and productive discussions. I want to step back a little bit from the topic of this week. This is a week when, of course, all of us, at least, and much of the world are focused on the question of climate change. But, of course, the challenge we face is much, much broader than that. We are coming out of a century that is defined by a series of graphs that have been come to be called hockey sticks, graphs which show exponential increase in population, in carbon emissions, in consumption, and the pressure that we're putting on the planet. And in many ways, the challenge we now face is to figure out how we create our own hockey sticks, how we find the solutions that can go exponential and can get to the kind of scale we need if we're going to meet those challenges in this century. And I think that requires actually that we continue to drive the urgency of climate action and at the same time make sure we're finding ways to put these issues in a larger frame, to remind people, to bring home to people that this is about saving the climate, but it is actually at the very center of the challenge of building a future which provides food, water, and energy for all the people who live on Earth. And that's no mean challenge. Now, that's a challenge which will, of course, require huge levels of innovation. And there's a lot of talk in a circle like this or in any other about technological innovation. There's no question that 10 years, 20 years from now, we will have technologies that we cannot now imagine. And that's an important piece of this picture. But at least as important is recognizing that we have the technologies today that allow us to meet the challenges we face. And what we really need now, as much as technological innovation, is the innovations in policies, the innovations in business that allow us to get those technologies into the economy, that allow us to make the transformation that we need to make. If you're in this business, as all of us, I guess, are in one way or the other, if you're in the debate about green growth or green economy or sustainable development, sometimes it can feel a little bit like a middle school dance. Everybody's standing around the edge waiting for someone to make the first move. And that's a real challenge for us. We can't be waiting for each other. We can't have business waiting for government to set the rules and provide the incentives. We can't have government waiting for business to show the political willingness to accept the rules. Somehow we have to find a way for each of us to lead in our sectors. Now in government, one can only despair about the potential for leadership in the at the multilateral level. It's very difficult to bring 192 countries together in common cause on a challenge as complicated as this. And we see negotiators here this week who now seem to be talking in very serious terms about charting a path that would legally bind us to a 4-degree future, which is an unimaginable prospect. You do see leadership coming from governments in different parts of the world, not least from the government here in South Africa, who are coming up with creative ways to build green into growth, to provide the financing that can catalyze much larger levels of private investments, to set the terms upon which green growth can really take off. So there is leadership happening from many governments. But what I want to focus on, not surprisingly, is what leadership looks like from the private sector. What is it that we need to see from the business leaders gathered in this room and your peers? Over the last 10 years, a lot of talk about sustainability has focused first on operations. How do we drive efficiency into our factories, into our processes? It has moved from that in recent years to looking across the value chain. And there are huge, huge new possibilities that come with looking across your value chain. Looking at where the big footprints really lie. Do they lie in your suppliers, in the agricultural practices that provide the products you use? Do they lie in the way your customers use your products? And so there is already a big expansion in scope. Going forward, leadership, I think, also requires that companies find ways to move their sectors and move their markets. And we're seeing that that is, in fact, possible. And that companies be increasingly willing to step up and engage governments to help drive them towards the policies we need to support a green economy. So if I can just give you a few examples of what that means before I close. One was an initiative announced a year ago at the negotiations in Cancun, and that was an initiative by 19 companies of the Consumer Goods Forum, who said, and these are big companies, this is Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and Kraft and Walmart and Tesco, these are big companies, who said the time has come for us to act to eliminate deforestation from our supply chains. We don't want to be part of that problem. And that means a commitment by each of those companies that by 2020 they will only source soy, palm oil, beef, timber, and pulp that comes from certified sources, comes without clearing forest. All right, that's a group of companies engaged with each other in listing their peers to collectively try to make a difference on a problem on a global scale. And those are big actors who, if they begin to deliver, can of course inspire others to follow. A second example from here in South Africa. Companies have for now several years seen the looming water crisis and despaired of finding a solution, because a company can take action to increase efficiency in its own operations, but water management is the province of governments and not easily engaged. And yet you see here in South Africa, big water users like South Africa breweries, like Nestle, working with the government, with the Minister of Water and Environment, and working with communities to find a way to strengthen water management here. The willingness to open up, to engage stakeholders in an uncharted process, I think is an important step forward. Tricky territory, scary territory for some companies, but the kind of territory we need to find a way to move into. If I can take a third example, maybe some of you don't know this, but tuna stocks, tuna fish, stocks all over the world are in trouble. There is no really healthy tuna population because we have badly overfished them, and they are among the most valuable fisheries in the world. Tuna fish is sold almost everywhere. But it is a public good, and management classically fails. So what's happened now? We have tuna canners who represent 70% of the global market. They buy 70% of all the tuna. And they've recognized that they're going to go out of business if tuna fisheries collapse. So they've come together to figure out how they, as market actors, can drive sustainability into the management of tuna fisheries. And for an NGO that's been trying to do that for a decade, that's an important new development. And now what you have is the tuna canners who have joined with environmental groups, NGOs, with the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and with the multilaterals, the Global Environment Facility, in a $170 million program to move all the fisheries to sustainability over the next 5 years. And that's, again, businesses thinking outside their usual lines of action to find a way to engage with others, to drive change, to drive sustainability into the marketplace. Now, those are collaborations of different sorts. It is, to me, as important that business find a way to step up as a policy actor, not just fending off regulation or taxes that you don't want to see, but actually to drive government action that we need to lead the way to a green economy. And my experience is that that's also uncomfortable territory for company leaders. And that's something we need to find a way to break through. We saw a bit of a breakthrough in Europe this year when 72 leading companies signed a letter to the European Commission in support of increasing the climate reduction target in Europe, the CO2 reduction target, from 20% to 30%. That was companies stepping out publicly to say this is what needs to be done and we think it can be good for business. We have another example closer to this event. 6 months ago, we issued a report with Oxfam on the potential to levy a charge on bunker fuels, the fuels for shipping and aviation, as a source of revenue for the Green Climate Fund. Huge potential there, the potential to generate maybe 25 million euros a year with a very modest levy, 0.2% of shipping revenues. The instant reaction to me from a couple of companies we work with in the shipping industry was, hey, we can support something like that, but we can only support it if such a tax is applied evenly across every mode of transport. Well, you know and I know that that's simply not going to happen. And what we have is the perfect as the enemy of progress. And that's frankly a subtle but clear attempt to obstruct progress. Right? That's an attempt to say, yes, we're for green growth, but only if it's perfect. And that's, I think, something you hear over and over again in these debates. But here, we launched that report, and we launched it with the shipping industry. And so we had a representative of the Shipping Industry Trade Association saying, look, we realize we have to do our part. We're ready to step up. We support moving on this issue and letting shipping be part of the solution. So it's possible to break through, but it has been difficult, and I think that's a critical part of the challenge we face. So in conclusion, let me just say two things. One is, basically what I'm saying more than anything else, is that this is a time when it is crucially important that business find a way to think creatively and expansively about the roles you can play. It's in your operations, it's in your value chain, but it is leadership opportunities across your sector and in your markets. And there is huge scope there, and we only succeed in meeting this challenge if we find ways to innovate, if we find ways to think much more expansively about what can be done. So leadership here is not the willingness to act if government paves the way. Leadership here is finding ways to drive change in your business, in your markets, that yield real results, and I think can create the political space that allows all of us to make the progress we need to make. Thank you very much.